to What's in the Box episodes of horror with Donna and Eric. I'm Donna.
And I'm Eric.
And we're continuing on with our Texas AuthorCon author interviews. And with us today, we have the lovely ladies of Brazen Folk Horror, Natasha Sinclair and Ruthann Jagge. Nice for you guys to join us. It's good seeing you.
Nice seeing you guys again. I enjoyed meeting you both at AuthorCon.
Yeah.
And
thanks
for joining us.
You both.
Yeah,
nice to meet you both for the first time.
Yeah.
Right. From was it over the pond? Is that what they say? Is that
across the pond?
Across the pond.
Pond. Yeah, in Scotland. So we just start off with a few fun icebreaker questions. And Natasha, I'll start with you. Jason, Michael, or Freddy? Who's your favorite?
Definitely Freddy, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Hands
Good.
down. I'm a huge Robert Englund fan. He's campy, over the top, wild. Love him. Yes.
I've loved Robert Englund ever since he was in V.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I forgot he was in V.
Willie, yeah.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was a great series.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's awesome in Urban Legends as the professor. It's fun to see him when he made a stamp as Freddy and stuff. But he's so Freddy that you can't see anybody else doing it, which is why I think nobody ever talks about the remake.
I think you're right. He is absolutely Freddy Krueger, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
I love him. I have such nostalgia with the Freddy movies because I used to watch them with my gran, lovingly dubbed as my horror granny when I was a kid, and she had them on Sky, so that was awesome. Loved that.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Ruthann, what about you?
I hate to be redundant. Y'all just froze up on me for a minute. But I'm going to say Freddy also. Once again, I'm a big Robert Englund fan. And just the mythology of it, to me, is so much scarier. If you think about it, and yes, we've got the menace with Jason and Michael, but Freddy, to me, those scenes where he comes up from under the bed and it's like, to this day, I can't leave like a leg hanging out. You know what I'm saying? I'm sleeping because all I can think of is that hand with that claw coming up under the bed that might grab me. So for me, it's a little bit edgier and a little bit more horrific, directly horrific. The other ones are kind of whispered about and they're in the shadows more. But Freddy tends to get right in your face.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
Well, he has more of an agenda. I mean, he's hunting these kids with
Right.
purpose and all that stuff.
Right.
So you can kind of get you can sense the fear in the movies. I think the first and the third Nightmare are tremendous movies. They are great.
Mm-hmm.
They're so good. They allow the other crappier ones to exist and not pull the franchise down. 1 and 3 are so good, but
That's a good point.
Friday the 13th as a complete arc is my favorite. I just love all the movies, and I'm a big Jason fan. But when we first started this, we had to add Freddy because originally it was just Michael and Jason. But after 3 times, everybody kept saying Freddy, so like, we better put Freddy back on here. You know, I wasn't even thinking.
And here we're doing it again. I did just read someplace, Eric, that they're going to do a prequel called Crystal Lake. One of the streaming services is doing it, which might be a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I think so. We'll see. I always hate when we go back, you know?
Yeah.
I'd almost rather let's just reboot it and start.
It brings it to a new audience, a younger audience that might not be familiar with the originals. So if they watch like a streaming service, oh yeah, I want to go back and watch those movies.
Yeah. Now, Ruthann, werewolves or vampires?
I think I know the answer to this one.
Absolutely no contest. I am a vampire girl.
Yeah.
I am an absolute vampire girl. In fact, I was just discussing this with my husband in the car the other day. And trust me, my husband could care less about horror in any way, shape, or form. He's a Texas boy. He's a rancher. He has no interest. But we got into the subject of vampires. And I said to him, he goes, well, like, who's your favorite vampire and all that? And I said, well, Lestat would be my favorite vampire. But for me, let the right one in where they introduce the trope of a child as an actual predatory vampire totally cemented the genre for me. There's just so many directions that it can go in. And don't get me wrong, I love a good werewolf, but there's something about the seduction and the lure of the vampire that it's for my forever favorite.
Nice. Natasha, what about you?
I swing back and forth between this one depending on my mood, but I'm going to go with werewolves. I'm going to go different. I'm gonna go. I like the hot-blooded, wild wolf. I think there's something. It's opposite from the vampire. They're dead. They're cold. They're dead. They're static almost. And although there's that seduction behind them, they just don't have that hot-blooded wild side that the wolf has. I love the werewolf.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like vampires kind of like they have an agenda. They know they have to drink blood to survive. The werewolf doesn't necessarily need to eat people or kill people to survive. It's just their primal nature. And they're just like, I'm just going after these people because that's what makes me feel good or whatever, you know?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what, though?
Well-
That's a great point, though, Ruthann, about let the right one in. Because I never think about. I don't like vampire movies. In fact, I will actively avoid vampire movies. But I do like Fright
We
Night.
can't be friends anymore, Eric.
Well, no, we can't, because I love Fright Night and I love Lost Boys. So those two I grew up on. I love
yeah.
those movies. But you're right. Let the Right One In is probably one of the scariest movies when you put into perspective how that child is operating and how she's manipulating her keeper, because that guy's an older guy and then she gets the new one that's a kid and he's going to grow old and then she'll have to do it again. It's so psychologically just terrifying to think if you got into that situation. So
Yeah.
I'm just not a big I'm not a big fan of like Interview with the Vampire or any of that. But I think that's more because I don't like the casting. You know what I mean? Like I didn't love the Tom. I mean, Brad Pitt was fine, but I didn't love Tom Cruise in that role.
Have you seen the TV series that they've been doing of Interview with the Vampire? That the casting is very different and their approach is very different from the movie. I'm a huge fan of the movie, and the books, of course. But the TV series, really impressed with how they've executed that. It's completely different. I think you should give that a try.
Is that AMC? Is that what
yes.
people do? Okay.
Well,
then I will. Well, the problem is that my wife does not do horror at all. She's just not a fan of it. So when I sit down to watch TV, we don't ever go into the horror realm, and I almost never watch TV by myself, but I will make a note to check out and see if that falls into the wheelhouse of something I can add to vampires. But I do love a good werewolf movie. In fact, it can be a terrible werewolf movie. I will sit down and watch it. I will give any werewolf a chance. I love werewolf movies. So
No, Natasha.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I were to pick a favourite werewolf movie, I think I would just end up going down a wormhole of all these fantastic werewolf movies, like Ginger Snaps. I love that adolescent. They've got that kind of seductive, they get lost in their appetite that you like from the vampires, but it's the young wolfling coming out. I love those. But I love a good werewolf transformation scene. I always rate it based on that, how they transform and the intensity of that.
I think that's why we like.
There's not enough of them. There's not enough werewolf movies.
That's true, and I think most of it was before CGI because it was so difficult to do the change, or it looked too hokey. And now, nobody's interested in seeing the CGI change because everybody's kind of burned out on it.
I have to. One of my absolute favorite werewolf transformations, and this is fairly modern, like in the last 20 years, so fairly modern, was the UK Being Human. Again, it's a TV series. I don't know, it's vampire, werewolf, ghost under one roof. The first time we see, it's not the first time, one of the werewolf transformations, and I cannot remember Russell Tovey's character name in it. He's the main wolf in it. He starts to transform. The clocks have went back, so he's lost track of the time, and he's in a primary school, and it starts to kick in, and the absolute panic comes across his face. Just the panic, the change scene, the camera is just on his face the whole time as he's running down the street trying to get somewhere so that he doesn't just go on a rampage and kill everyone. One of
especially
the
in the
best
school.
transformations. Yes, with his girlfriend and the kid that none of these people know that he's a werewolf. It's really intense. It's fantastic.
Wow, I had seen that show, but like mentioned, but I had never watched it, so I'll have to give that a watch.
I think I've seen some of the American version.
Yeah.
Isn't there? I think there's one on Netflix or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's also a really great werewolf movie that I never see anybody talk about. I think it was a Netflix movie. It's called The Wildling or Wilding. And it's basically about this little girl who's been like locked in a house her whole life and raised by, I think, her grandfather. And then she escapes, and you don't really know what the movie's about other than that. But then towards like as the movie progresses, you're like, what is going on? And it turns out this little girl is actually a werewolf, and that's why the grandfather like kept her locked in this house. So I was like, I just put it on one day. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna throw this. What it looks interesting, and I was like very impressed. It was a pretty cool werewolf movie.
It's funny because my husband's like Eric's wife, and he really doesn't want to sit through it. And the only time we watch TV together is in the evening. But if it's funny because if I've got something on, like you're referring to, like a streaming werewolf movie or something, Mike will watch that. There seems to be more of a masculine draw to that, where if I've got something vampiric or witchy on, he's like, oh God, here we go again. But there's something about the werewolf that he's like, yeah, well, this doesn't look too bad. Are they hunting? That kind of thing. Even what's the one with Liam Neeson, The Gray, where it's not werewolf, but it's so wolf focused. And he's like, well, is this about werewolves? I bet they're going to change, that kind of thing. I think there's something like Natasha referred to. It's more primal. It's more a part of like the dark side of humanity, maybe a little bit more than a vampire, because that's more of a seductive need. That's more of a narcissistic kind of trope, where like she brought in the werewolf is just strictly, oh yeah, we're just going to do this because we're freaking wolves and we can do it, that kind of thing. So I think that's the appeal for my husband, even though he does not sit there typically and watch a horror movie unless I hold a gun to his head. So I'm like, really? He's like, really? Can we put on something? No, we're watching this because I'm halfway into it, and I just paid $9.99 for this damn thing.
Yeah.
So, Ruthia, do you have a favorite scary movie from when you were a kid?
Ooh, there's always one that I mentioned, Donna, Phantasm, only because I think it's a very underrated franchise. And if you think about it, the originality of that movie, and then there were several sequels afterwards, is very iconic. There's nothing else like it. And to me, that figure of the tall man and these creepy little creatures that lived on the other side of the crematorium, mausoleum, funeral home, whatever. There's nothing else like it. When I was a kid, I remember like we'd all be sitting there watching it. I have 7 siblings, so when we watched something, it was also a battle for the television. I've been fighting for the TV most of my life, but
sounds like it.
Everybody was like, oh my God, the tall man, and the kids in the neighborhood would be running around throwing things at each other. That really made an impression on me. Because it is so different. And I think just now it's beginning to be more appreciated for what it was. It was campy, it was kind of humorous, but it was also genuinely terrifying if you were a kid.
And it holds up. It holds up still. I just watched it a couple years ago.
Yeah, creepy adult. And there was a cemetery around the house from where I grew up. And I mean, of course, we all played in cemeteries, not disrespectfully, but just because we weren't supposed to be in them. So, of course, that's where we free-range kids went. Wherever we were told not to go during the day is typically where we'd end up. And I just think that character and that whole originality of how the story played out appealed to us. There were a lot of us, and I've talked to several kids, grown-ups now, that grew up in the neighborhood, and we're all like, oh yeah, remember the Phantasm days, that kind of thing. So for me, it's Phantasm.
Nice.
Yeah, and the special effects are amazing because when you have the sphere, we don't have CGI, and they were able to make that thing look like it flew and chased, drilled into their heads and shooting the blood out of the back and stuff. It's an amazing, especially because it's so low budget. The fact that they were able to do it, but also do it in a way that you completely believed and bought into all of it.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the tall man was Agnes Scrim, and I believe he passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's getting a lot more of attention now from some of these other small, short filmmakers, because Eric just nailed the point. it was really pretty progressive for what it was. And it was violent and it was strange. And I think it was what a lot of these small movie makers are trying to put out now. Something is unique.
Yeah. Natasha, what about you? I know you had mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street was a big influence in you when you watched with your gran.
Yeah, definitely. I watched a lot of kind of religious horror with my gran as well, so they're very much embedded in my mind, like the Omen movies. So that's all quite embedded. It's really hard for me to pick a favorite movie. I wouldn't say I had one favorite horror movie from when I was a kid. I kind of gorged on it. So I enjoyed the intense religious horror. I liked splattery, crazy effects of the Evil Dead and all that stuff. All the good, rich 80s horror was very colourful. I loved it all. I liked a lot of Hitchcock as well. I loved The Birds. I always thought that was really creepy, just the idea that something,
Yeah, I
again,
love The Birds.
it's
Oh,
an
yeah.
amazing film as well. It's so intense and just they could come from anywhere, and it's something, yeah, I love, yeah. So movies like that too.
Yeah.
Will you
Poltergeist.
guys watch them? Were they like my mother, if she walked through the room and we had something like that on, we'd have to flip it real quick and then flip it when she went out of the room. She wasn't real big on it. She thought it was like going to give us night terrors or something, and she'd have to be up putting up with it, I think.
No, my parents were very progressive in that. My dad did not believe in restricting anything. So
That's
my mom would always be like years later she'd find out I saw a movie, and then she would be like smacking my dad, like, what are you doing showing him that when he was 4 or 5, you know? But my dad hated horror. So I didn't get that from him. I just discovered it myself and just kind of started watching it. But yeah, no, my parents were very hands off when it came to what you watched.
Yeah, same with my parents. The only thing we were forbidden to watch was like straight up pornography,
Well, yeah, of course.
you know. But you know, I remember watching like The Exorcist or American Werewolf in London at a very, very, very young age. And you know, it seems to be a common theme with a lot of people in the indie horror community, watching and or reading things that probably weren't appropriate at whatever age you started at. So, but I think I turned out okay.
I think that's a healthier approach as well, just to be really open and not to cover up content and age restrict it, because kids grow up knowing that's special effects, that's a story, and they get interest in all those background scenes. My parents weren't fans of us watching stuff like that. I stayed with my grandmother often, so I used to have my horror binge sessions at hers, or I'd wait until everyone else was in bed, and then I would sneak up and put the TV on after hours and watch it when everyone else was asleep.
Yeah, my dad's idea was to just say, cover your eyes, you know, if it was like something sexual or something like that. But then it's just like this, you know, you're just doing that. So not really covering anything.
My grandfather used to love the Twilight Zone. So when I stayed with my grandparents, like Natasha, it was frequently, my grandmother would be like in the kitchen and doing stuff, and he'd be like, we're going to watch the Twilight Zone. Almost like he was like looking out to see if she was going to walk in. My grandmother was very Catholic, and looking to see if she was going to walk in and, you know, make a comment or say, oh, you shouldn't be watching that or something like that. But the Twilight Zone was very formative too. If you want to talk about short, creative, interesting, broad range of subjects. I mean, just the way things were done. For me, that stuck when I was younger. Whether it was the cosmic horror or whether it was a little more direct, or the things you didn't see because they weren't real blatant in their approach. A lot of times it was more implied than it was, because it was only 30 minutes. It was implied more than it was in your face.
So and people don't realize how bad restrictions were back then for our television. So kids today have no idea how easy they have it. You know, they can stream whatever they want and nothing seems to be rated anymore. But back when, like you're saying, you're right. Twilight Zone was amazing. Alfred Hitchcock Presents, all those great shows you would watch late at night.
Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. We can't forget her.
Oh gosh.
Well, that's
but that's a whole other category of B campy horror movies. I loved her. So Natasha, if somebody were to come up to you and say, I want to get into reading horror. I've not really read horror before. What would you recommend to them?
Honestly, I don't know, because the horror genre is so massively wide, and unfortunately, we are kind of living in a time when people are. It's difficult to recommend things without knowing what triggers people or sets them off or what they're uncomfortable with. So that's such a difficult question. Yeah, I really struggle to answer that. I mean, personally, I write a lot of material that people could be quite offended by. So I'm really not sure. I'm not sure where I would start them off. I would maybe start them off with Richard Lehman, just to get a good feel of where they're at.
That'll tell you right away.
Start
That'll
with
tell you
that,
where
and
they're at.
then we'll know where you're at, which way to go.
So they're at the deep end, and we just threw them right in there with some Richard Lehman.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Just
no, I'm
throw
with
them
you.
in with some Richard Lehman, see
Yeah.
where they sit, and then we can take it from there. Yeah.
Yeah, he's my favorite author. So I'm with you there. I love
Oh, that's awesome.
How
What about you,
Ruthann?
Ruthann?
It is a tough one. I probably would suggest them. They're actually similar, but they're opposite ends of the spectrum. I would say start out with some of King's earlier work, or start out with some of Clive Barker's earlier work, because to me they were both so influential in the genre. And I'll take it back. I remember being younger, and I mean, it was hard to get a hold of those things. I mean, it wasn't like now where you could just go online and, get whatever you wanted at the touch of a button. So I would tell people, read some of King's earlier work, read some of his lesser known short stories that have now, a lot of them become serialized or they've been transferred into movies. And also read Barker, because if you want to go into true horror, there are very few that paint a visual picture with words like Barker does. For me,
I was gonna say, which one would you suggest for Barker?
Well, you've got Books of Blood, but Imagica is one of my absolute favorites from Barker. I have a couple of old Oriental rugs in the house, and if you've read Imagica, he basically takes you into a very dark world based on the figures in a rug. And to be able to do that, to have that kind of mind that works that way, for me, Barker he's pretty much the gold standard when it comes to true horror and original horror. And like Natasha said, now we've got so much available to us, and there's such a broad range that you can choose from. But I would say King, but I would say some of his earlier work. I would say read Salem's Lot, read, some of his short story collections before you got into some of the more commercial things, where you could see where he was a true storyteller. He was just a guy that was telling creepy stories.
Yeah, the Coke years.
That's a good way of putting it. The Coke years, even before that, when he was poor and hungry. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, do either of you have a favorite horror novel of all time?
Oh, look at us both looking at
I know.
Favorite horror novel of all time. I'm going to say this because I'm a big fan of Ron Kelly's Fear. Would probably be one of the ones at the top of my list.
Agree.
Only because it's timeless, it's relevant. You could read that book 25 years ago or 25 years from now, and it would still have the same effect. It's a simple story, but it's so human in the way Ron has written it, and it's so timeless. I would say Fear is right up there for me.
Nice. Your turn, Natasha.
Again, you're asking me about favorites. It's impossible.
Yeah, no, it changes daily, right?
Yeah.
It does. But one that I always go back to that had a big impact on me when I read it as a teen. Again, it was probably one of the more extreme things I'd read at that point, was Poppy Z. Bright's Exquisite Corpse. And when I read that, I then devoured Poppy's entire catalogue. I just loved how he took elements from real life horror and made that
she froze on us.
intense.
Oh,
Am I
you
back?
froze for a second. That's why
Back,
you're
you're
back.
back.
Yeah, so Poppy Sebright, Exquisite Corpse, I read it when I
Oh.
was a teenager and it had a massive impact. It was probably the most extreme thing I'd read to that point, and it kind of split open doors for me then into different areas of the genre. When I read that, I read everything of Poppy's I could get my hands on. I loved how he took elements of real life horror, because it was obviously inspired by Dahmer, and made a fantastic, extreme, gritty horror novel. And there was a lot of subversive play in that. I enjoyed it.
Nice. Yeah, I was actually given that book, Exquisite Corpse, as a gift. And I really need to bump it up my list of where I'm going to put it on my TBR.
It's memorable.
Yeah.
I just saw he's going to be a guest of honor at Nikon.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And he's not around very often. I don't know if he uses pronoun he or they, but he doesn't show up very often at the events, and he is going to be a guest of honor at Nikon.
Oh, that
Oh.
is amazing.
That's
Mhm.
actually takes place in the city that I live in, so I might have to go to that if it doesn't conflict with Texas AuthorCon.
Oh gosh, yeah, they've got some amazing people coming.
I'll have to check into that because I know Tommy Clark is going to be there because he went
Mhm.
last year.
Mhm.
So why don't you guys tell us about, so for the people that may not know, you guys have, you are co-authors, but you also write your own, you have your own books that you've written individually. So whoever wants to go first, just kind of describe what genre you prefer to write in, or subgenre, if you want to call it that way, if it's, you know, mostly horror that you write.
You guys just fight it out amongst yourselves and then throw out the answer.
It's always going to make me go first. Subgenre, typically I like folk horror, rural horror. I'm not one for cosmic horror because I don't feel I write it well enough or believable enough. But in Delavan House, which we co-authored, our most recent release, we bend a lot of genres. We're going into fantasy, we're going into dark romance, we're going into historical horror. So for me, as long as it's got roots in kind of a traditional small town, rural, backyard, boogeyman kind of story, it's my favorite to write in. But I can pretty much write in anything. But if I have a choice, that's what I'm going to cement in.
Nice.
Yeah, for me, I write a little bit of everything, I suppose. But I'm definitely more drawn to folk, gothic, and urban horror. There's always sexual elements and psychological elements in my writing as well. But yes, and I tend to be inspired by historical events or little nuggets of stories that I hear, or little bits of mythology that I read about, because I'm a bit of an obsessive reader on all things history and Celtic mythology. I like to read about the Picts, and although there's not enough data on that, and interesting archaeological digs and the things that people find, and then I create all stories out of little things that people dig up from history.
Yeah, that's
So, yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, I like
That'd
to
be
do
cool.
that too. I have a whole folder just filled of just stories of historical stories that I can go jump into and figure it out so I can write.
We're both obsessive researchers. So I think that has something to do with it too. We do actually research. It's not just we read other people's work on the subject, we go digging. It took us 1.5 years to write Delavan House. And I mean, we spent a lot of time digging, and it was crazy because she'd send me an article and I'd send her an article. And then we'd start going down rabbit holes, and then we'd be reading about all these other things. Well, we can't fit this into this book, but we'll fit it into book 2, that kind of thing. So I think if you do love history in that respect, and you do start digging around, I mean, it's just crazy what you find out and how it can really influence what you're writing, even though you're writing a more contemporary piece.
Yeah, and it, you know, it's, for me at least, it's really, and Ruthann, we're friends on Facebook, so you see that I read a lot.
Yeah.
And it really, is noticeable to me when an author or authors, if it's, you know, a collaboration, has done research and put that work into the book. It's very noticeable. I'm not saying every book needs to have like in-depth, deep, you know, research, but if you're basing it off of real myths or real events that have happened, you know, you can certainly tell.
It's very valid, and the other thing is if you're going to go for a broad readership, there will be people that will know the difference and they will call you out on it. Now, we have not encountered that at all, but I do know other pretty notable authors that if there's not details that are accurate or time frames that are bent a little bit too far in their work, people kind of want to know what's up. They're like, well, that isn't right. You know, maybe you should read this and that kind of thing. And we try to avoid all that. It's damn hard enough putting your work out there and then being exposed like that for reviews and comments without getting your facts straight, if there are facts that it's based on. So Natasha and I are pretty much almost obsessive about that. If we're going to use something that's historical, we're going to get that part right. Now, we may embellish on it, or we may color outside the lines with it, but what it's based on, if we're going to present that as a point, is going to have some fact behind it. So when somebody does call us out, we can go, oh yeah, well, but by the way, have you checked this out? Or do you know about that? And I will say this, Natasha left out that she's also an outstanding poet. She writes incredible poetry, and I don't write poetry. I don't read poetry. Poetry's kind of lost on me. I'm one of those people, but she writes, she's like our dear friend, Mike Ennenbach. She writes these things and you read them. And the next thing you know, you got tears rolling down your face because it like tugs at certain parts of you that you don't even know are there, but they hit the words just right.
Yeah. It's a special talent. I mean, there's only a handful of people I know that can do it. So
do it well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, either of you listen to music when you're writing? What's your soundtrack for when you're sitting down to write?
Yes, all the time. Music is my go-to when I'm writing, and I know for Ruthann it's big with her too. We actually, when we were leading up to publishing Delavan House before it was released, we shared the soundtrack with readers as well, so you can access the playlist on our website. So we both would share music with each other, like, when you hear this track, does that not just make you think of Kiva? So all of our characters and situations tend to have a soundtrack that formed around them. I always find that sometimes my characters don't listen to the same music I listen to, which is a total nuisance.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I think it can really help you get in the zone. Yeah. I think it's very much a case of art inspiring art as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was because when we were comparing notes on our music, Natasha hadn't listened to Lana Del Rey, and I hadn't listened to a couple of the bands that she's fond of. So we were exchanging, and then we were listening to them. It was like, oh yeah, I really like that. Yeah, I'm really into that. So we kind of introduced each other to some different musicians and styles in music also. And then what was funny is we had some of the same ones on our playlist, because we tell people that once we were over a year into writing the novel, we kind of like shared a brain at times. And then when we found out we liked some of the same music, it was like, holy cow, this is scary. Because like she just said, I think anytime you've got a sound, well, think about it. When you're watching a movie, the visuals, it's so emotionally driven by the music. I think that when you're listening to something, when you're crafting a story, it can also put you in that frame of mind that takes you outside of yourself and more into the character, the setting that you're trying to write at the time.
Nice. Yeah. So
I totally agree.
Yeah. So we covered your newest release, which is Delavan House, that you co-authored. Do either of you have any other upcoming projects or new releases that you have out?
Well, the second book to Delavan House, the Delavan Diaries. We do have that available for pre-order.
Oh,
So that's
okay.
in progress at the moment. That's going to release in November this year. And the third and final book in the trilogy, we're aiming for spring 2024 because we have a lot of events next year as well. Ruthann is actually coming over to Scotland.
Oh,
So we will
Cool.
get to meet for the very first time in the same room, even though we've been speaking every day for a year and a half, 2 years now, but more than 2 years. I don't know.
We can't quit each other.
yeah,
No, we can't. We can't.
Don't want to.
yeah. Now we just need to get you over here, Natasha.
Yes, well,
I have offered. We are working on it. She's still got young ones at home, so it's more of a challenge for her. But very honestly, book 2 in the trilogy is going to consume us for the next few months. We've basically stopped doing independent projects and open calls. I will add this: we will try to always write for RJ, because RJ published us both first, 3.5, almost 4 years ago now. And we will always try to do something for RJ if he asks. But other than that, we've, like she said, we've got these other 2 books in the trilogy, and then we're already outlining something after that for another trilogy that's going to be totally different. So
Wow.
I think that we enjoy so much of what we're doing collaboratively. That's not to say there won't be other things coming out. Like I did a novella from D&T Publishing last January, The New Girl's Patient, that's had great reviews and it's done well. And I have promised a full-length sequel to that.
Good.
But
Thank you.
Not coming today or tomorrow. I hope I could have gotten it out, but honestly, what we're doing right now is we're focusing on the Brazen Folk Horror brand, which is the publishing imprint we formed when we truly decided we both had offers and Delavan House could have been picked up by a publisher. We both decided that because we were going to go for international distribution and we wanted to keep creative control of the way we did things, and if you know us, we do things different. We definitely wanted to maintain that part of it ourselves. So we are a 2-women operation. We do all the graphics, all the PR, all the formatting, all the publishing. We've got a newsletter coming out. When is it, Natasha? The 21st of January?
21st of June is our
January.
Yeah, so the newsletter did turn into, it was, oh, let's do a newsletter, Natasha. And I was like, I'm not really into that idea, Ruthann. We've got a lot on our plates just now. The newsletter is now a quarterly magazine, which launches on June 21st. So anyone that subscribes to Brazen Folk Horror, if you subscribe to our newsletter, you will get a digital ebook of that newsletter quarterly, free. It will be available in print to purchase to anyone who wants to purchase it 2 weeks after. But our subscribers will always get it first. So
nice.
So we'll have that link below so that people can go sign up because they need to get that.
Awesome.
That's really awesome.
Eric. We're just so immersed in this story and in doing it right. And as y'all both know, these events are consuming. They take a lot of time and energy to get ready for them and to get all your stock and your swag and your merchandise and everything in order. And Natasha's got several coming up, and I've got StokerCon, and then of course Texas AuthorCon, which we're super excited about. Brazen Folk Horror is a sponsor. I will be there. Natasha will not be, but we're a sponsor, so it's very important to us that she's represented as well. And from what I understand, it's the tables are sold out, and I think Eric mentioned he was there at the first one. The second one this year is kind of taken on a life of its own, and there's a lot of people coming from out of state. But I think that people are so hungry for that human reader, writer, let's get together and talk books and stuff and ideas after being cooped up for so long. I mean, almost 2.5 years, we couldn't do that. So I think people are hungry to get out and do that again. But I'm excited about Texas AuthorCon. Now that's in Dallas. It's about 5 hours from me. And I think it's going to be bigger and better and even more fabulous than any of us think it's going to be.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, when we did it last year, it was 14 people. and this year it's 66. I think somewhere around between 60 and 66 authors will be there. So,
I think that he had 80 tables. Now that may mean that he's got the publishing tables or whatever also, but I know there was a wait list at one point. And
there still is.
Yeah, we've gone on to add panels. I will be on a folklore and fantasy panel with some terrific people. It's kind of, it really didn't have an outline like some of the other cons that have been done successfully for a number of years, but truly it's taken on a very professional face. I think it's going to be, one people are going to want to come to in the future.
Well, it's only our second year. So it's really cool that we got it. I mean, it's just, it's gone crazy. So I think it's going to be a fun event. And we got, like you said, people coming from out of town. So it's not just a Texas event. It's a Texas attitude, is the way I've been putting it. So.
And some of the people coming, I mean, I did meet a lot of people in Williamsburg at AuthorCon. I'm excited about some of the people coming because, again, I haven't met some of them. I mean, I have been friends with, I met Mike Emmenbach at AuthorCon, but I mean, I've been friends with Chris Miller and Patrick Harrison. I mean, a lot of people for a long time, but we've just never connected because there really isn't anything in Texas to go to connect. So I think in that respect, it's going to be really, really fabulous. And I really wanted to represent. So that's why we took on the sponsorship, which was minor, but it does make a difference because it gets your name out there with even more people. So Natasha's going to be there in spirit.
Yes, yes, you will. So thank you both for joining us. It's been a very, very lovely conversation. Now, Natasha, it was great to get to know you.
It was fantastic to meet you both, and obviously it's always lovely to see my beautiful Ruthann, my Brazen girl there.
So yeah, so come on out to Texas AuthorCon and go see Ruthann at the Brazen Folk table. That's July 14th and 15th in the Dallas area. It is a free event, but if you want to be eligible for the door prizes, you do need to sign up for an Eventbrite ticket, which we'll have a link down in the description of the episode. And again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you all so much. I'll see you guys in Dallas, and I'll see you soon.
Thank